I've been doing a little spring reset with my closet lately, focusing more on quality over quantity. Just building a wardrobe of pieces that are well made, versatile, and easy to reach for every day. That's why I keep coming back to Quince. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are thoughtful, and the pricing actually makes sense. Quince makes beautiful everyday pieces using premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and super soft denim, with styles starting around $50. The spring pieces are lightweight, breathable, and effortless, the kind of things you can throw on and instantly look put together. With unseasonably warm weather in California this week, I'm recording this in shorts and my white European linen casual short sleeve shirt. Refresh your spring wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that one friend who always finds the best travel deals, picks the right cards, and somehow ends up in first class for the price of coach? Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things finance, like which deals are actual deals and not just clickbait, when that convenient travel bundle might actually be a hidden tax in disguise. The smartest way to book flights without playing the guess the cheapest day game. How to avoid paying for upgrades you won't use. The nerds at NerdWallet know this stuff better than me, and that's why I feel great about recommending the Smart Travel podcast. After all, we nerds have to stick together. Travel smarter and spend less with the help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Amateur Traveler, episode 990. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about emperors and imperialists, temples and tulos, gardens and Guangzhou as we go to Southeastern China. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about Southeastern China. I would like to welcome back to the show Jonty Crane, who's come to talk to us about yet another far-flung destination. Jonty, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
So Jonty is one of the most requested guests on Amateur Traveler, mostly by himself, but he has come to talk to us about Southeast China this time. Jonty, what area are we talking about today?
So this is a trip I did over New Year just gone, and it's the area close to Hong Kong. So if you start in Hong Kong, so as we did, and then we're going to train for 4 hours over to Xiamen. And then we headed in to explore the Fujian area around there. And then we headed back to Guangzhou, and then from Guangzhou back to Hong Kong. So it's a bit of a sort of triangle trip from Hong Kong for 1 week.
Excellent. And why should someone be exploring this part of China?
Well, China's a pretty unique country in many ways, and it has a very fascinating history and lots of interesting things to see. And this, interesting, was my first trip to China. And so I chose the places where no Westerners go, which wasn't intentional, but it turned out that I saw probably less than a dozen Western tourists in my week there. There was quite a lot of Chinese tourists, particularly over the New Year period, because there was a public holiday there. That's the calendar New Year, not the Chinese New Year, but it was still quite popular. But it was a great way of seeing very much China and the sort of things that Chinese tourists would go and see. So it gave me potentially a different experience than going to Shanghai and Beijing. And it was close to Hong Kong, and I was going at New Year. So the rest of China was like snow and cold, but this bit around the southeast edge of the country, the temperature was just perfect. It was 15 to 20 degrees every day, blue skies, just perfect weather, a good time to visit.
And that obviously is in Celsius. So we're talking about 60 degrees in Fahrenheit. Excellent. And what itinerary are you going to recommend for us? You did the broad outline, but where are we starting?
Just a little bit of history, actually. So this part of China is one of the bits that was opened up to the west first. Xiamen and Guangzhou, which was then known as Canton, were two of the first cities in China to open to foreigners way back in 1842. So the Treaty of Nanking, which followed the First Opium War. So this is when the British deployed gunboat diplomacy to open up the country to trade, which A decade later was when the US did that in Japan, just in terms of an idea of timing. So actually China opened up a decade before Japan due to that interesting approach to geopolitics. And then actually when they started to reopen again to the West in the early 1980s, those were the cities which were special economic zones in China. So they've really grown a lot faster than other parts of China. So it was interesting just from a historic perspective that there's actually quite a lot of Western era history and Western colonial style buildings in these places.
Excellent.
And then heading into the place itself. So if we start with Xiamen, so this is a city I'd never heard of. It is the 25th biggest city in China, and it is home to basically the same population as New Zealand. So it just, again, gives a bit of sense of scale. Like you realize, the country I call home is actually quite small because it's the same size as the 25th biggest city in China. It's a very attractive city, actually. It's a port city. If you think about it on the map, it's about 280k from Taiwan. So it's the closest city to Taiwan across the Taiwan Strait. And yeah, I didn't know what to expect. And China's, I don't know, it's quite hard to understand what you're going to see, but it's a very modern place, basically, and very well maintained. And the traffic actually moved pretty well, and it seemed quite an organized place. I started off my trip there at the Xiamen Botanical Gardens. I've been to a lot of botanical gardens. I think these must be some of the biggest botanical gardens I've ever visited. We had 2 hours there, and that was not enough. Like, we needed at least half a day, because the sort of things you'd expect to see in the botanical garden, particularly in the Chinese garden with nice lakes and little pagodas and different climbed areas. But it's also full of temples. Like, I wasn't really expecting to see... I saw these shrines. I thought, okay, that's fine. And then you're like, oh no, this is a full-on temple. And then you walk, 20 minutes down the paths through the botanical gardens, there's another full-on temple. It was great for kind of the history and the sightseeing, and that was just a really nice place to explore the city. And after that, I went to the 8th seafood market, Bashi. Now, Chris, you've probably been to a few markets in China. I've been to lots of markets around the world.
Yep.
Yeah, the Chinese wet markets are an experience. Wet because it's a seafood. Probably half the things for sale in the market were wet, as in they were in their tanks. So you've got massive crabs, you've got eels, you've got sea urchins, you've got squids, live octopus. It's pretty full-on sensory experience. I have to say there wasn't really much that whetted my appetite. It was very good for the photography. I didn't really see anything I wanted to eat. I did have some crabs, actually, so there was quite nicely cooked crabs. It's just an experience to wander around. And as I was saying, there's no Western tourists. It's not touristy at all. It's very much an authentic Chinese wet market experience. There's quite a few temples in this itinerary. The biggest one in Xiamen is the Nanpututo Temple, which dates back to the 1600s. It was quite impressive. Like, I think you get a bit templed out, as you do with churches and mosques, various things. But this was quite a nice example of a temple. I probably enjoyed more the Shan Fortress. So this was built at the end of the 19th century as part of China's attempt to, it's called the self-strengthening movement. And there was lots of conflicts. There was the war with the Japanese, there was a Boxer rebellion. And so they built this big fortification. So this has got beautiful views from the fortifications. And it's known for, there's a 14-meter long cannon, a Krupp cannon. So it came from Germany. They bought 2 of them, just one of them was remaining. And it was semi-successful, but ultimately the city fell to the Japanese in 1938. So it wasn't entirely successful, but it was interesting just to see that fortifications. And if you like a bit of military history, that's a good place to go. There's a museum there which I didn't have a chance to visit, but if I had more time, I would have gone to, which is the Overseas Chinese Museum, which talks about the life of Chinese living overseas, which is quite a big diaspora. So that would be an interesting place to visit if you get the time. And the reason for this is I spent a large proportion of my time in the city visiting Gulanyu Island. Never heard of this place before, and it is one of the most popular tourist sites in China. So it attracts over 10 million tourists a year. Almost all domestic. I saw half a dozen Westerners on the island. You get there, there's quite an impressive ferry terminal, which feels more like an airport in terms of size and scale. And then there's ferries that go pretty much every 15 minutes out to this island. It's just off the coast. They could build a bridge there, but they've said that they're just going to stick with the ferries for the authentic experience. And this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this island is less than 2 square kilometers, so it's pretty small. But it's full of historic buildings dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries. So Gulanyu Island and Shanghai, they were the only international settlements in China at the time. And so if Westerners wanted to
Interesting.
trade with China, that's where they set up base. So there was 13 countries, mainly European plus some Japanese. They had embassies or consulates there, or there were traders. And so there's quite a lot of architecture, which there's not a lot of that left in China itself. There's a little bit in Shanghai, there's a bit of in Guangzhou. I'll talk about, obviously, if you spent time in Europe, you've seen lots of buildings that look like that, but it's obviously a big draw for Chinese tourists to visit the island. And the cruise there is very pleasant. You get really nice views of the skyline. Cars and bicycles are banned from the island. So that makes it a lot nicer as a pedestrian, although there are very large electric golf cart, electric buses that you can use to go around the cruise with the island. I visited, it's funny because I said to my guide, so I had a guide for the Xiamen and the Tolu areas. We had a guide for 3 days, basically, and then the Guangzhou bits we did independently. And my guide said, oh, it's very quiet at this time of year. And I'm just looking around at thousands of people thinking, this is quiet? Okay. There's an experience in itself just in terms of the number of Chinese tourists and what they're up to. But that was a relatively quiet time of year. But it is an interesting place to visit. There's some beautiful gardens. So the Shuzan Garden, which was built in 1913 by a wealthy Taiwanese businessman, very pleasant little bridges and lakes, and it's just by the sea as well. So you've got the ocean, then you've got a seawall, and then you've got this lake the other side of it. Next to that is the only piano museum in China, which is quite niche. There's not a huge number of piano museums in the world. Personally, it wasn't really my thing. It was interesting, the blurb about it was like, oh my God, it's the only Chinese piano museum. And you're like, there's probably a reason for that. But the island is renowned for classical music. So there are lots of concerts held there. There's lots of well-known Chinese musicians that originate from the island. And there is actually a sister museum dedicated to organs. And I was like, I've seen enough musical instruments for one day. I'll give that a pass. And instead, I went to Sunlight Rock. So this is a quite dramatic rock formation in the middle of the island, which we can get to the top of. And there's quite a few sort of temple buildings at the base of it, which are interesting to wander around. And then at the top, you really do get like sort of 360-degree view of the island and out towards the city. And it's just, a very pleasant place to go. And then actually one of the main reasons that Chinese tourists visit this island, it is home to some of the best beaches in China. So China isn't typically renowned for the quality of its beaches, but the ones on this island are beautiful, yellow, golden, sandy beaches, and the climate is very nice down there. So it's a popular place for Chinese to go and see a beach. And it's interesting seeing what they do on a beach, because there isn't a beach culture in China, and they're not the Spanish. They're not going to get some bikinis on and start sunbathing on the beach. There was nobody in the water. There's just quite a lot of people milling around fully clothed on the beach, looking at the beach or sitting on the beach, but they're not building sandcastles. They're not doing a lot of the activities that you typically associate with being on a beach. So that's interesting in its own right as a cultural experience.
Interesting. Before we get too far away from it, you said you have a tour guide. How did you find a tour guide for this area?
So I went to China Discovery, I believe it's called, which is one of the largest Chinese tour agents, and they had lots of different itineraries. And we had 2 weeks in Hong Kong. So we had a week in Hong Kong. Then I thought, okay, we'll do a week in China, and then we'll come back and have a week in Hong Kong. So I was looking for places I could visit which were relatively close to Hong Kong that weren't going to be freezing cold, because at the moment I'm living in Fiji and I've got no warm clothing. So that limited my options about how far north I could go in China. Was I need a big coat that I don't own. Okay, I'm not going to go there. So that's what kept me along the coastline on southern China. And so they've got quite a lot of different itineraries. This is definitely not even in the top 20 most popular. Like, this is relatively obscure, but that was one of the attractions to it, was something that I had never really seen. I think the main attraction is what we're going to come on to next, which is talking about the Tulos. And that was the focus for the trip, was spending time looking at the Tulos. And then the time in Xiamen was a bonus, because that was the entry point to do that.
Okay. What is a Tulo?
What is a Tulo? That's a good question. Tulo are unique, massive, fortress-like earthen buildings, which are typically either round, square, or rectangular. And these buildings can be up to 3 stories high, and they could be home to up to probably 200, 250 people. And so from the outside, they're quite fortification-like. They've got big earthen walls. They've got very small little windows. And then when you go inside them, they've got a wooden structure, and they're much more homely. And that's because they are home to a single extended family. So generally, there's the patriarch of a family, and there's normally a shrine dedicated to the patriarch and the lineage of the Tulo. And these Tulos can be 600-700 years old. Right? I think the newest one was early 20th century, but some of them, 600-700 years old. And so they built these Tulos, and so their entire families would live in them. You'd get a room allocated for life, and you'd be living with your entire extended family within one structure. And if you Google a Tulo, so it's Tulou, they're just quite different things, especially the round ones, perfectly round buildings, often in quite picturesque locations. And I think the photograph hooked me when I was looking through all the different things I've been in China. I was like, I've not seen anything like that before, so let's go and have a...
And I have, but it was in the movie Mulan. In the live-action version, I swear that they filmed it inside a Tulo, because when I saw this, that's what that is.
I think they did, yes. Very photogenic. I can imagine them using the film. They're part of the Hakka people. So China's home to lots of different ethnicities. The Hakka people, there's about 80 million of them. So it's one of the sort of larger groups. And I think the guide was explaining they'd moved down from northern China to southern China, and so they weren't quite sure how things were going to work out. So that's why they built their homes in quite a fortified state.
Interesting.
And it's one of China's 60 UNESCO World Heritage Sites.
Okay.
And actually, China's got the second most UNESCO Heritage Sites. So China's got the second largest number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the world. I think Italy has one more, 61, but China has a lot more on the application list. So I give it probably a few more years and China will have the most UNESCO World Heritage.
It's a little larger than Italy.
Correct. But it's they've got a map, I think it was on Wikipedia, of all the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in China. And there were some places I found in there which were like, I've never even heard of this. It looks amazing. So I'd almost probably use that for my future China planning, maybe to avoid some of the more popular areas, because there's lots all over. So there's 46 of these buildings were listed as part of the UNESCO listing, but there are thousands of them depending on how you define it. So the tour I did was 2 days, and we had a driver and we had a guide, and we'd head out and we'd visit generally one cluster of Tulo in the morning, and then we'd go to another one in the afternoon, and then we had a really good stay overnight in the rural area, and then the next day visited a couple more, and then we returned to Xiamen.
Cool.
So the buildings themselves, now my pronunciations, I'm going to struggle with some of these. So I'll just go through some of the Tulo we visited. So the first one visited is the Tindoken Tulam cluster. And this is known by the Chinese as the 4 dishes and a soup Tulo. They like to give, I think China is quite like their numbers and name combinations for naming things. And so when you look at it from above, there's 3 round Tulos, there's 1 oval Tulo, and there's 1 rectangular. So that's why they're saying it looks a bit like a set meal from above. And you can actually get quite expensive ice cream in the shape of Tulo. And I saw it elsewhere in China. I think popular tourist sites in China, there's a company that's onto a good thing about making replica buildings in ice cream, which look quite good, but they were pretty expensive for an ice cream. So it depends what you want there. And obviously, as it's ice cream, you can't take it home as a souvenir.
Not so much, no.
So the Tulo are the same but different. So I ended up probably going at least a dozen of them. And so they get a bit similar, but they've also got the variations around them. So the shape, as I say, can vary. The height of them can vary. And generally inside on the ground floor, depending on how touristy it is, there will be a range of commercial activities. So they'll be selling tea, selling cigarettes, which is, you're selling cigarettes. Okay, you don't tend to see that much in the West. And selling quite nice paintings on wooden backings. And so they tend to have a little place you can eat around the base. And then generally the first floor and upwards is where they live. So those areas are generally off limits, but often they are worth a little bit of money. They will let you wander up and get a slightly different view from the other levels. And so this is good. This is quite an insight to see how a lot of people, they still live there. Younger people are moving to the cities. They've become quite popular tourist attractions. So they are giving people a reason to stay there because of the tourism. Some of the Tulo they've converted into homestays or hotel accommodation, so that's another income stream. The toilets are all outside the Tulo, so they do have a night bucket. So if you need to go in the night, they fill up the big bucket, and then in the morning they'll take it out. But the proper toilets are outside the Tulo for hygiene reasons. So that was interesting just to see how they are, and they're often set in quite nice settings. So this one, it's all got rice fields around it. It's terraced. You go up, you get from the lookout.
Rakuten opens up a world of rewards. You can earn cash back on fashion, beauty, electronics, pet supplies, kid stuff, groceries. But what I'm here to tell you is with Rakuten, you can get cash back on travel too. Join and save on your next trip. You'll get cash back on the flight, the hotel, and the car rental. Book on your favorite travel sites like Expedia, Booking.com, Viator, VRBO, Hotels.com, IHG, and more. Save on cruises, vacation packages, and experiences as well. And don't worry, cashback can be earned on top of your credit card points with many loyalty programs, because we know you're saving every way you can. So go ahead, take a trip, find the perfect hotel, book an artesian cheese experience inside a cave in Spain. Wherever you want to go with Rakuten. Join today for free. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's RAKUTEN. And thanks to Rakuten for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. I don't know about you, but I like keeping my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers also seem to like keeping my money too. Before Mint Mobile asked about being a sponsor in the show, I was already looking at Mint Mobile because what they offer, the same towers, the same service for less money, was something that appealed to me. After years of overpaying for wireless, I finally got fed up with crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks that actually cost more in the long run. Stop overpaying for wireless just because that's how it's always been. Mint exists purely to fix that. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/traveler. That's mintmobile.com/traveler. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
And then the afternoon we went to the Yangcheng building, which was the oldest Tulo. So this dates from the early 1300s. And it's the largest and it's the highest Tulo. So it's got 270 rooms over 5 stories. So it's quite a significant structure. And so that's just impressive to see the size and scale of that Tulo. Then in the evening, we went and stayed at Taxia Village, which was probably one of my highlights of the trip. So this is just a very nice little village on a river. It's mostly pedestrianised. It's home to Dijan Hall, which is a 400-year-old temple, which has very elaborate wood carvings and really nice porcelain mosaics on the roof. And outside the hall, there's these 4 stone flagpoles. Now, the guide has explained that half of them are for people who have contributed significantly to the village, so they've given lots of money or land to the village. And then the other half of them are for people who've lived over the age of 100. So in the history of the village, there's been maybe a dozen people who've lived over the age of 100. And we stayed at the Lotus Land Hotel, which was on the river, and it was a bit disconcerting because it was very nice actually. So we walked inside the room and it felt Scandinavian in terms of the interior decoration. And you look out the window at these hundreds of year old traditional Chinese buildings with elaborate roofs. And that evening there, it must have just been the time of year, but it was dead. It was in a good way. Like the village was so quiet. We felt like we had pretty much the entire place ourselves. And it's all lit up at night and it's super reflective on the river. And so it's a really pleasant place to wander around, got some food. And then we noticed there was this green laser, which was firing off from some sort of little tower in the middle of the village. And you're like, what's going on here? And the laser was drawing Tulo buildings and horses and just various things. It was drawing in green laser on the hillside next to the village. So I don't know if you've ever seen anything like that, Chris, elsewhere, whether it's a Chinese thing or...
I've seen it. I'm trying to think of where I saw it. I want to say in Hong Kong, they had a laser light show at night. But yeah, interesting.
Different scale, but it was just cool. And it was just a really nice experience to wander around and very atmospheric. And then the next day we went to see some more Tulo. So we saw the Chaksu Tulo cluster, which is known as the most beautiful Tulo cluster in China. They've all got their own variations, but this one's actually photogenic, beautifully restored, I think with the UNESCO listing. And actually that's one thing I noticed about China is the tourism infrastructure was first class. Clearly, they've spent a lot of money on it, and they've also, at certain times of the year, they must get large numbers of tourists to justify the infrastructure. So coming into some of these Tulo clusters, there would be a very large, elaborate visitor centre with a big car park. Generally, you're not able to drive up to the Tulo cluster. They've put the parking facilities a little way away, and then you walk in, or you've got little electric buses to get you into the site. So yeah, very well set up. And so this one was very well restored and very photogenic. And there's this temple in the middle of it, and it was very photogenic, very beautiful. And then we're going, oh, it's got this tree with persimmon fruit on it. And then I think it was my wife said, well, are they in season now? And the guide, no, they're not. And it's a fake tree. And you're like, what do you mean it's a fake tree? So we walk down and they've literally sellotaped all these branches, like they're actual wooden branches, but they've basically built a fake tree out of a real tree and then attached fake persimmons onto there. And then outside there was all this little field of rice, which looked very attractive. And then you're like, oh, it's plastic. Oh, okay, it's plastic, right? Okay, so it's a little plastic rice field so you can get your perfect photographs. So I did find out a little bit about China. They do quite like the curated tourist experience. So I do think they value the looking good over necessarily the heritage value. So if it was in the UK, you wouldn't be able to touch it. You would have to be as it was in the 15th century and it'd have all these rules and stuff. But in China, let's just restore it and make it look beautiful. And that's what they've done.
Interesting.
And then the last Tula cluster we went to was the Hongkeng, which is one of the most popular ones. Therefore, it probably was my least favorite, but it was quite accessible. Some of the other ones were quite windy roads to get to. But this was a village of about 2,500 people. But it has a very nice entrance. There's water wheels. There was a KFC in the shape of a tulo. So it's probably one of the few ground KFCs that I've ever come across. And they've got the Shenzhen building, which is known as the Prince of Tulo. Again, they've got names. So there's the King of Tulo building, there's the Prince of Tulo building, and that's one of the newer ones from 1912. And yeah, slightly different style. And it had a portrait in there of Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping, president of China. Anywhere he goes in the country, there will be a photograph of him having visited that place. And so that was a thing where they talked about Xi Jinping came here because I think he was actually posted into the province in like the 1980s. So it was quite a long time ago, but it's interesting how much of a sign of respect it is that the president has visited your place. I don't know whether if Bill Clinton or Obama's been somewhere, whether that would have the same reverence as it does in China.
Probably not quite the same, but he's got a little more longevity than any Western ruler.
Correct. So. I think it's quite a popular thing for US presidents in fast food joints. That's the thing. If presidents visit your fast food joint, that's going to boost sales. And the last Tulo I visited in the village was the Rushling building, which is the smallest Tulo. So this was built late 19th century and it's only 23 meters wide, but otherwise it's identical. So it's just like a mini version. It's 2 or 3 stories high. It's a little bit smaller, but otherwise the same structure and stuff inside. So I just thought the whole Tulo experience for 2 days, by the end of it, I was definitely Tulo'd out, but I really enjoyed seeing something completely different that I wasn't expecting. And I didn't see any Western tourists at all for the entire 2 days. So when we stayed in the village, it was completely quiet. And it was just, a really good travel experience. And then we came back to Xiamen, and then we got the train over to Guangzhou.
Okay.
So Guangzhou, you have got a previous episode on it, but there's a few sites which I think are worth adding to that. So Guangzhou is about an hour north of Hong Kong, if you get the train. It's home to about at least 18 million people. So it's twice the size of London. It's one of the largest cities in China, one of the largest cities in the world. Most people probably haven't heard of it, or they might have heard of Canton. But if I think of Shanghai, I can visualize the Bund and I can visualize the new areas, and I've got a bit of a mental picture about it. And if I think of Beijing, I probably think of the Forbidden Palace. But if I think about Guangzhou, nothing springs to mind. So it was quite interesting to visit a huge, significant city, which I had no mental image of what was there. So that was one of the reasons visiting.
And a lot of people, if they've heard of it, had heard of the old name of
Canton.
So when we talk about Cantonese, this is the region that they're coming from. And so a lot of the people who came from China to other places, like who came to the U.S. to work on the railroad or South America for the similar sort of things, were coming from this region. And a lot of the Chinese food that people were first associated with, therefore, in a lot of Western countries, were coming from this region also. It's just, that's not what we call it anymore.
Correct. And again, the mental image, there's nothing, and even actually having visited Guangzhou, there's not like an iconic, I mean, there are 2 very big skyscrapers downtown. Actually, there is the Canton Tower, which is one of the tallest buildings in the world. So I guess that would be their iconic symbol, but it's not something that you typically see unless you're looking at trips in China.
Mm-hmm.
So Guangzhou actually has an island called Xiamen Island, which is similar to Lanyu Island in Xiamen, so it's even smaller. So the one in Xiamen was about 2 square kilometers. Xiamen Island is 0.3 square kilometers. So it's basically 2 streets. So it's a tiny little island, and it was controlled by the British and French from the mid 1800s. And again, it was used as a base for international consulates and for European and Japanese trading companies. And so there's lots of heritage buildings. It's a very pleasant place to walk around. I went there on a public holiday, which I would recommend and not recommend. So I wouldn't recommend it because there's thousands of people. Clearly, everybody decided to go there on their holiday, and it's a big city. But I would recommend it because it was really good for people watching. I've never seen so many people taking photos of other people as in that place. And quite a few of them were dressed up. Again, I think this is a Chinese or an Asian thing around fancy dress. So you'd see these young women, fancy dress with purple big wig, and they're wearing an 18th century French maid outfit or something, and then they're getting their photos taken. And so, yeah, it's just quite good for the people watching. It's the first time I've ever seen, there was somebody walking their dog, and behind that, there was somebody walking their cat. So there was a cat on a lead, which is not something I've ever seen before or may not ever see again. I don't know if that's a common experience, but I was the first I've ever seen a cat on a lead with a harness, so walking the cat. And yeah, it's just a photogenic place. There's sort of places to eat. So if you like a bit of history, that's worth probably an hour or two of your time. And then if you go from the island across the bridges, I mean, it's an island, but it feels more like a moat. The gap between the island and the land is maybe 10, 20 meters, so it's not far off the mainland. And so heading just probably 10 minutes walk north from there, there's the Jinping market for raw materials for medicine wholesale. So Chinese medicine, huge industry in China. The ingredients are just anything you can think of or not even think of in terms of animal plant products and or dried. And so this is where you go and get your Chinese medicine supplies. So there's just vast bags of things which I had no idea what they were. It's not photogenic particularly because everything, once it's dried, seems to go as a pale yellow colour. It's not a colourful market, but it is a sort of an experience market in terms of...
It tends to be olfactorily interesting in those markets that are filled with herbs and things like that more than pictorially interesting.
Correct. So you do, have a bit of a sniff, although, you'd probably get some smells that you've not come across before. There's some quite unusual ingredients. And then the Fujian New Town. So this is really the center of Guangzhou, the modern Guangzhou, and it's redeveloped over the last 20 years or so. And it's home to the 3 tallest buildings in the city. So as mentioned earlier, the Canton Tower, which is the 5th tallest freestanding structure in the world. So it's pretty big. I didn't go to top. You can go to top so you can get fantastic views around. And there's a Guangzhou Finance Center and there's a Guangzhou International Finance Center. So there's some pretty tall buildings that I didn't quite get. Maybe I've become accustomed to tall buildings. I didn't feel a sense of overpowering scale, but I think that this might be the way everything was laid out. If you like big skyscrapers and modern architecture, that's worth visiting. But I was mainly there for the Guangzhou Museum. So this is pretty large museum structure with quite an eclectic collection. So half of it is permanent displays. They had some quite impressive carvings. It's amazing what the Chinese can do with jade. A chicken made of jade with all its like skin all quite well textured. It had a bit like the Natural History Museum in the UK. It had lots of aquatic animals hanging down on cables. So whales and sharks and dolphins, which are just cool to see. But the problem is when you look closer up, and they also had a sort of area with native animals, including monkeys and deer and things. The quality of the taxidermy, I have to say, was left something to be desired. If you look close up at the animals, they look quite terrifying in terms of what they've done with the taxidermy. But so that was just an experience in itself. And then there are temporary exhibitions on as well. So there was a really good one about lacquerware, particularly with stuff that the Chinese was exporting to the West in the sort of 19th century. So and it's free, but you do have to book your tickets online, which I'll come to in the logistics of China, because that's probably the most important part of this talk is how to actually get around China, because it is a bit different to other places. But in that new area, so just opposite the museum is the Guangzhou Opera House, and this is a Zaha Hadid design building. So if you know her architecture, so she was famous Iraqi British architect. There's good works of hers in Azerbaijan and in the London Olympic site. And the buildings tend to be very curved and would have been impossible to have been designed before the age of computers. So they're quite distinctive architecture. So that's just something you can see. And then heading into old Guangzhou, so 2,200 years ago, there was the Nanyu Kingdom, which I think actually didn't last that long. I feel like it was maybe 3 kings worth, so maybe 100, 200 years worth of reign.
2,000 years ago sounds like the age of the Three Kingdoms, too. You're right around that time frame.
It may well relate to that. Yeah, so it was quite a large kingdom at the time. Yeah, 3 kingdoms.
And the age of the Three Kingdoms didn't last all that long, as I recall.
So there's a couple of sites that relate back to that period. So the first one I'll talk about is the Palace exhibition area. So they built a pretty impressive palace based on the scale models, and you can visit the foundations of the palace and the sort of things they found there. I'd say that was moderately interesting. What I found more interesting was there's a museum where they found the tomb of the king. And so the tomb itself, you need to book to go into. They've only got limited numbers, and I think they try and manage the numbers of people who go down there for preservation reasons. But it wasn't, from the photographs I saw, it's not Egyptian-style tomb. There's not amazing paintings on the walls, but it had a number of different chambers off it. And all the interesting stuff from that has been taken up and put into the museum that sits above the tomb. And the king was buried with all these jade items around him, and so they're on display in the museum. And that was just, quite an interesting laid out museum to visit. In that area, I guess, of Old Guangzhou, there's the Chenclang Ancestral Hall, which is one of the most popular temples in Guangzhou. And I went there on a public holiday, and I didn't go anywhere near it. The queue was insane. It was like, am I at Disneyland or am I at a Buddhist temple? The queuing system seemed very similar. So I was like, okay, I'll take a few photos from a distance, but otherwise I'm going to flag this. I found the city god temple, which is next to the King Palace area. That was much quieter, 600-year-old temple. So that was quite much more enjoyable experience to visit. There's the Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall. So that was opened in 1931 in memory of the founder of the Republic of China and leader of the 1911 revolution. So he's one of 3 great men. Our Chinese guide was telling us about the great man theory of China. Just, very attractive building to see from the outside. But I'd say in Guangzhou, my favorite area, and one that wasn't really touched on in the previous podcast, is around the Banyan Mountain area. So this is just to the north of central Guangzhou. It's probably 20 minutes in a taxi to get there. It's very accessible, but it's a large open green space. They say it's a mountain. It's 400 meters high. I'm not sure whether I'd class that as a mountain, but it's a reasonable sized hill, and it has been a scenic spot for thousands of years. There's historical texts talk about it as being a popular spot for visitors for centuries. Now, you can go to the top there. They've got a cable car, which is just a very pleasant way to avoid walking up the hill. So we've got the cable car up. It was interesting going to the cable car because there was a set of queuing barriers, and you're like, okay, this might get quite busy during peak times. And then that led into another set of queuing barriers. You're like, okay, this thing must get really popular. And that led into another set of queuing barriers. So I have to say, maybe don't go in like the afternoon or sunset on a public holiday because the queues would be out of control. But we went there maybe 8 o'clock in the morning and there was zero queue. We went straight up. We had a cable car gondola to ourselves. And it's a very nice way to head up the mountain. And you get some really good views of the city, really good, nice views of the skyline. And then we walked back down. And as we were walking down at 9:30 in the morning, this was a public holiday, so maybe a bit skewed, there was just thousands of people walking up the hillside. So it very much pays to get there early to get a slightly quieter experience. And then at the base of the mountain, there's 2 gardens. So there's the Yulo Botanical Garden, which was beautiful. It's like one of the most attractive botanical gardens I've ever been to, I think. And it's very new. It only opened at the end of 2024. It felt a little bit like the botanical gardens in Singapore. Like, it's not quite as good, but it had an orchid house and it had quite a lot of infrastructure in a garden. So it had these walkways that were elevated, which went around these spirally things, which had these quite elaborate roofs. It's obviously spent quite a bit of money on it. And it was just a very pleasant place to wander around. And then we went next door to the Yantai Garden, which is 30 years older, and it's China's largest exotic plant garden. And this was quite a different experience for a couple of reasons. Firstly, by the time we got to this garden, it was late morning and everybody was out. It wasn't a quite reflective experience. It was just chaos in terms of the number of people there. But again, there were some people in fancy dress taking photos themselves, and that was interesting to see. And secondly, it was far more, I would say, kitsch in terms of a garden. So there was these colourful mascots.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Little windmills and
and there's a little fake Greek temple thing, and it's not really my scene. And there's lots of perennial bedding, and it's.
I was going to say, you say quiche as if it were a bad thing, but
it was interesting. It was an interesting cultural experience. But normally, if one thinks of like a botanical garden, that's not what springs to mind. But it was interesting to get the contrast between the 2 gardens. It was pretty cheap. It was worth to explore around. So that was my week in China in terms of what I saw and did. But I think it's worth talking a little bit about getting around China.
Before you get to that, just you were talking about the Nanyue Empire and
Correct.
how long that lasted. Yeah, so I was in the wrong era. I was in 200 AD instead of 200 BC. So this would not be part of the Three Kingdoms. So we're 400, 500 years apart from what I was talking about.
Chinese history is all the dynasties. It is fascinating. There's just a lot of history. So it's an understandable
there is a lot of history.
mistake to make. Yeah.
Some people hate to plan travel. That's going to come as a surprise to you because for some of you, this is an adventure, this is a joy, this is a journey, this is a puzzle. And you might consider becoming a Fora travel advisor. As a Fora advisor, you can take your love of planning travel and help others travel as well. The Fora Tech platform, training, and community give you everything you need to turn your passion for travel planning into a flexible, meaningful, profitable travel business. As a Fora travel advisor, you get best-in-class training, powerful booking tech, and a global community of experts and fellow advisors who help you share insider knowledge to help you launch and grow your own travel business with confidence. Every hotel, cruise, or activity you book as a Fora advisor earns you money in the form of commission or a percentage of the booking costs. Getting started can be as easy as booking trips for people you may already be booking trips for. Become a Fora advisor today at foratravel.com/traveler. That's FORA travel.com/traveler, and make sure that you tell them I sent you. foratravel.com/traveler, and thanks to Fora for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Mom, can you tell me a story?
Sure. Once upon a time, a mom needed a new car.
Was she brave?
She was tired, mostly. But she went to Carvana.com and found a great car at a great price. No secret treasure map required.
Did she have to fight a dragon?
Nope, she bought it 100% online. From her bed, actually.
Was it scary?
Honey, it was as unscary as car buying could be.
Did the car have a sunroof?
It did, actually.
Okay, good story.
Car buying you'll want to tell stories about. Buy your car today on
Carvana.
Delivery fees may apply.
So in terms of visiting China, so it was my first visit to China. I had a really good experience. I didn't quite know what to expect, and particularly visiting these less well-known parts of China. But I had a really good experience there. But it is somewhere that it pays to do a little bit of preparation for. If you just landed, especially in some of the more remote areas, you would struggle unless you knew how to do a few certain things. So to start with, getting around. Uber doesn't work, but they've got a local app, Didi, which is the Chinese version of Uber, and that works very well. It's very cheap. The traffic in Xiamen was busy but manageable. The traffic in Guangzhou was some of the worst I've come across. It was pretty slow trying to get around. A lot of people, and the first thing in the morning was fine, but pretty much it wasn't like a rush hour thing. It was just an all-day gridlock thing. Now, there is a metro system there, which I've heard good things about. I would say that if you're traveling, I'll come on to WeChat and how I pay for things, but I was trying to use that for the metro. Now, generally with metro systems anywhere, it's best to have your own ticket. So I was there with my wife and I was trying to get two people on one payment device. And so I swiped her through, she went through the ticket barrier. Then I couldn't get through the ticket barrier. And then my wife's on the other side and I'm here and I'm like, the app's mostly in Chinese. I just, after about 10 minutes like that, I give up. Can you just try and find an exit and get out again, and then we can be reunited, and then we can get a taxi. So we end up getting taxis most places just because I had troubles trying to do that. But yeah, that could be fixed relatively easily.
Yeah, most things in China are paid for with your phone. And so there's the assumption that you both have a phone. So I assume there are different ways of handling it when you've got kids with you and things that I don't know. But yeah, quite a lot of things are paid for. You started mentioning paying for things with WeChat, and that's definitely one of the different online payment systems that you can use for a lot of different things.
So actually, my entire time in China, I did not use physical money once. I paid for everything through my phone, which is so much better. I was actually being back in over New Zealand. I never used cash either, but particularly when traveling, it was really useful not to have to worry about unknown currency. So I paid for restaurants, I paid at tourist sites, I did street food, I tipped guys. Like tipping was very easy to do through it. So I said there's WeChat, and there's 2 or 3 main apps that you can use. I just have to choose WeChat.
The tipping of the guide's usually going to show you a QR code that you're going to scan from your app to pay them directly, basically. It's a person-to-person money transfer.
Yeah, it works brilliantly because you can put a QR code on your one, or you can scan somebody else's QR code, and you can, it works a dream. And what you want to do is you set it up so it links to a payment method like a credit card. Now, this was my first time I'd used Wise, which is for money transfer. So I've got a Wise Visa card. So I load New Zealand dollars onto Wise, and then I can convert it into Chinese and yuan, and then that then links to the WeChat. And so when I'm paying for things in local currency, and I'm not getting a conversion fee every time I make a payment. So that worked a lot better rather than using, say, my New Zealand credit card, because then that would start to give me bank fees and all sorts of other fees every time I used it. So I'm basically paying in local currency. And then when I finish, I was like, I've got a little bit of money left. I can just convert that using the app into, say, Hong Kong dollars. And then when I went to Hong Kong, I could travel with it then. You always end up with a pocket full of random notes from the end of your trips.
I've got a bag of currency over here with different plastic bags in it with pesos from this country and yuan from this country or whatever. I still have from various trips.
So it's nice as a souvenir, but sometimes you're like, that's $50 that I'm probably not going to get back anytime soon.
So I used Alipay and actually just had it tied directly to my credit card, but I have all of my travel credit cards have no international exchange fee. And so if you're traveling in general, this is not just a China thing, and you're using your credit card, it is better to have one of the cards that has no foreign transaction fees.
Definitely. Yeah, so Alipay or WeChat. I would recommend that you set it up outside of the country, because certainly I found it needed to do quite a lot of verification. It was sending you passcodes via text messages. Trying to do that in China could be a challenge. So that's why I say doing a little bit of preparation before you get in China will make things a lot easier. Like, I was a little bit apprehensive before I got there. And then first time I used it, I was like, this is amazing. Life's going to be so much easier in China. This is straightforward.
Yeah, I think the first time is a little weird when you're trying to figure out, am I giving you a QR code? Am I scanning your QR code? And then it just gets very simple.
So it worked really well. In terms of getting around the place, so the high-speed trains in China are fantastic. Say it was 4 hours out to Xiamen. Then we did a couple of days by private car. There's lots of new motorways and highways, all toll roads. When I was using it up in Fujian, there was almost no traffic, very easy to get around.
The only caveat to the train is you were probably buying your tickets last minute, and you can't buy them more than 2 weeks in advance.
Correct. The travel agency, China Discovery, they organize the train tickets for me. Yeah.
And I use the trip.com app, and they basically, and I've talked about this in a previous episode, where basically I said, I want this ticket. It will go on sale here. Basically, when I'm traveling, they bought it and sent it to me, but I had already paid for it. So that made that simpler. But it's weird that you can't do it 3 weeks out, even 2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks to the minute, like the booking kind of open thing. And although you do get a train ticket, what they actually use is your passport. So I've never used my passport as much as I have in China. So your passport is effectively your ticket. And on the trains, you just present your passport. And a number of the tourist sites as well, you needed to show your passport. So you should need to carry your passport with you at all times in China.
Yeah, at least a lot of the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Which, as a surveillance state, I mean, they're tracking your ID and where you've been, but it is quite an efficient way of accessing things. Now, on the train, I had issues with the apps and trying to get it work, but there is a way, or certainly the Chinese have got a way, is you can pre-order food from restaurants at stations that your train has not yet arrived at. And then when the train arrives at the station, they cart on all this basic fast food, McDonald's and whatever else, onto the train and then bring it to your seat. So you're not limited by what's available on the train. You could get pretty much any meal. But I say I couldn't quite get the app thing to work correctly. Everything in China is basically done through apps. Some have got translation into English. The translation doesn't work so well. So I struggled there. But I saw it was definitely possible. I just couldn't figure out how to do it.
But yeah, get your translation app, your payment app. Again, I used Alipay, you used WeChat. Get your DD app. There's 2 versions, one in China, one outside of China. Get the inside of China version. That was largely it.
I think so, yeah. Just once you got those key apps, that's a mistake I made, was I got the Didi outside of China. When I got there, I had to get the Chinese one. But then that will work fine. And again, you link your Didi to, I think it was linked into the WeChat, and then it all just works. quite seamlessly.
Oh, then the only other thing would be if you want to access things outside of China, then you need a good VPN. And I've talked about previously that Total VPN is what I recommend inside of China these days. I don't recommend some of the other traditional VPN apps.
It was interesting because when I got to China, I thought, okay, I'm not going to be on Google or Facebook or Instagram for the rest of my time in China. And then it worked perfectly fine on my phone. And I was like, it's quite confusing.
Yes.
And when I checked it afterwards, so I used LLO eSIM, and the way the eSIMs work, apparently, they're effectively like a virtual VPN, which is they don't even use the Chinese net. They route all the data outside of China through Hong Kong or other places.
So most of the eSIMs I used did not allow you to get through the Great Firewall of China. So that's not true with all eSIMs. But it was true for me if I used my native T-Mobile account, then I didn't need a VPN. So it depends a bit.
It does. It's worth doing a little bit of AI check or a little bit searching online before I started using AirAllo. And I wasn't expecting to be able to do it. But then I was there and it was working fine. Then afterwards, I asked ChatGPT and said, hey, I just went to China and there was meant to be this great Chinese firewall and it was fine. And they basically said they're not that fussed about international tourists. They're really fussed about Chinese residents living in China. So the way it was set up basically meant you circumvented the Great Firewall of China. The internet speed was pretty slow still because there's a lot of people and I don't think there's as much infrastructure as they need around the internet. But yeah, that was a bit of a bonus that I could access everything. The only other app I would also recommend is Google Maps. Doesn't really work very well in China because they use a different GPS system. And so like the satellite, if you look at Google Maps in China and turn on the satellite, nothing lines up. You'll be like, hang on a moment, the road is there, but on the satellite photo, the road is clearly 3 kilometers away and it doesn't sync properly. And so I used a local app called AMap, which is a Chinese version of Google Map, and that worked really well for finding places. And also like the translation of some of the names into English, you're trying to find the place you're looking for it's not an exact science.
But when you consider that most of the people in the country don't speak English, and unless you studied Chinese, you can't read the signs unless they have bothered to put them in English or you have a translation app, it's not as hard to travel in China as I think a lot of people think.
I would definitely agree with that because you can either type, but also the most good translation apps these days, you can speak into the app and it will translate it into Chinese and you show it to the person, then they speak into that in Chinese and show it back to the person.
It is so much easier than it was 10, 20 years ago. It is amazingly different because of the apps.
Yeah, makes you, because apparently they do learn English at school, but I was surprised how little English people knew. Not even hello or goodbye or thank you or just the basic words you might. If I go to a foreign country, I learn those in Spanish and I just know half a dozen keywords for traveling around. And even in quite smart hotels, the receptionists would have no English. So it is quite a different environment where you're like literally nobody here can speak the language.
Yeah. So the 2 trips I did to China last year, I ran into a range, depending on where you were. When you walk into a major worldwide chain in Beijing and you walk up to the receptionists, they speak wonderful English. And then when you were out in the rural hinterlands and you walked into a hotel, you were using the translation apps. And that's not too surprising. They don't run into that many people who speak the language that you and I speak. What are you going to do?
Exactly. That's the thing is, even though China's a big country, it's probably under-touristed from a Western perspective, or at least outside of your Xi'an, Beijing, Shanghai places. So once you start getting out of there, then it's very much set up for domestic tourists, not for international tourists.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, so the biggest challenge I had in China, though, was the food. Now, I think if you're an adventurous eater, there is a lot of eating adventures one can have, and there are some incredible things. I am not an adventurer eater. I just need the food. I'm traveling. I'm not really a foodie. I just need enough to keep me going. And so that was probably the hardest thing I found about the trip, was finding places to eat. The translation apps seemed to struggle a bit with some of the menus. I remember ordering once beef and I got squid, and I thought that's quite different to beef in terms of because we're like, because my wife was like, we've ordered the wrong thing. And then I was like, no, I ordered the right menu item that we thought was this sort of food, but the translation let me down. And what surprised me was even in Guangzhou, which is a mega city, there wasn't the range of international cuisine that I'd expect to see in most other cities of that size. So normally if you go to a big city, there's an Italian restaurant, there's a Thai restaurant, there's Mexican restaurants, it's always different. That's a big thing. In China, because China effectively is a continent in terms of the variety within the country, it's like Europe in terms of the variety of different dishes and different regions. And so there's loads of different Chinese restaurants that all serve all these different meals from around China. And I remember our tour guide, he said he did a trip to Europe and he couldn't cope with the food. Like he just ate Chinese whole because he couldn't cope with the food. And I felt having a similar experience in China. I was like, I just want, I could just eat some rice and some chicken. And then you're like, I order rice and chicken or ginger chicken. And you're like, that's not a cut of chicken I've ever eaten before. I don't normally have like bones sticking through it with blood and then the skin and this, and the textures. It's quite a different world. So I think, again, if probably in a Shanghai, Beijing, there's probably more international. But if you're going into, I wouldn't say remote because these are big places in China, but I did find the food can be a bit tricky.
It's funny. That's not my experience. I guess I'm more adventurous than you are. There are limits because I'm not a big seafood lover, and quite often, when you're on the coast, that's obviously a lot of seafood and things. Excellent. Anything else people need to know before we get to some of our wrap up questions?
The only thing I'd say is safety. I felt very safe at all times.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think that's one of the advantages of an autocratic state with heavy surveillance is the very low levels of crime. And I felt very safe wandering around the place. The main risk actually, I'll comment later. Toilets, like certainly where we're at, there is free, excellent toilet infrastructure everywhere I went. It was never an issue.
Better than in Europe.
Yeah, way better and better than the US.
Better than a lot of places in the US. Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
So that's because sometimes it can be a bit of a worry what's the facilities going to be like, but it's fine. And then from a cost perspective, the transport was very affordable. The hotels were pretty cheap. The attractions are relatively cheap. The guide and driver combo was, I think, $2,200 US for 5 days. But it was only really a 3-day tour. So I thought that was a little bit more expensive than I was expecting. Yeah. But that did include accommodation and transport and entry into places. That's probably, if you added it all up, it made sense. But yeah, generally, like eating out and getting around was pretty affordable. So it's an affordable kind of place.
Yeah, that's more than twice what I did for a 5-day Yangtze River cruise. So
I guess there was only two of us and we had our own guide and we had our own driver. So it was a bespoke tour. Yeah, so that's my China experience.
Excellent. And you know my wrap-up questions here. You're standing in the prettiest spot that you saw in southeastern China. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
So the Taxia village in Fujian province, so in the middle of our Tulo tour, that was, as I said, that was just very picturesque, very quiet. I love the reflections as a photographer on the river, and that was just, a lovely place to spend some time.
Excellent. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in southeastern China. You had an answer for this. I could tell that you almost gave me a few moments ago.
So e-bikes are incredibly popular in China and generally electric cars. So you can see the number plates. If it's got a green number plate, it's electric. If it's got a blue number plate, it's petrol or diesel. And probably half the cars on the road are electric. So they've gone very well with that. And there was actually a reasonable amount of cycle lane kind of infrastructure. But they had the e-bikes, but not actually e-bikes. They're basically electric motorbikes, or electric scooters, so that people basically don't need to pedal. And these were terrifying. This was like the most risky thing that happened to me in China, was just because the cycle lanes tend to be near or on the pavements and where pedestrians are. Even over the footbridges, over the roads, there would be like a ramp. And then there would be this guy on this electric scooter hooning up the ramp to get over the bridge. And they're electric, so you can't hear them. And a lot of them look like they're almost homemade. You can see the wires sticking out from the battery and they look fairly rudimentary. And people will be driving the wrong way at one-way streets on them. They'll be riding the wrong way along bike lanes on them. And so I just felt that in India and Nepal, lots of scooters, but they tend to be petrol. And so at least you can hear it. Whereas here, I was always a little bit stressed out as a pedestrian, trying not to get run over.
And this is what we always talk about when I talk to people and they say they're nervous about going to China because is it safe? It's like, from what you're thinking about, absolutely. But you do need to watch traffic.
Correct. There's just a lot of people in a relatively small space trying to get around. So that's some of the challenges.
Exactly. And if you had to summarize southeastern China in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Historic, modern, and fascinating.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Jonty Crane. Oh, we didn't mention your website, from jontytravels.com. And I assume that you have some posts on your trip to China on your website. Is there one we should recommend?
Depends on when you listen to this episode, because I have a backlog of approximately a year's worth of posts for the blog. Because when I travel, I set and I schedule them, and I only do 3 posts a fortnight. And so at the moment, I'm scheduling posts for April 2027. So if you listen to this podcast at some point early 2027, there might be some blog posts available, but otherwise you'll have to use Google.
Excellent. And thanks so much for coming on Amateur Travel and sharing with us your obvious newfound love for China.
Thank you.
Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't clone you, but it can streamline your hiring workflow. From posting jobs to shortlisting candidates to interviewing, LinkedIn Hiring Pro is the hiring partner you need, so you can focus on connecting with the right talent. In fact, small businesses report saving over 6 hours per week. So hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
A special thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially, and a very warm welcome to Tosh, who's the latest patron of the show. If you're interested in learning more about what you get as a patron of the show, or you'd like to support Amateur Traveler, then just go to patreon.com/Amateur Traveler. On the recent episode we did on Hidden Gems of London, I heard from Mark, who said, "Hi, Chris, I enjoyed the London episode. Few things I have done, few ideas saved for Easter holidays. Short trips from London could do worse than a trip to Southend-on-Sea. About 50 minutes on the train from Fenchurch Street Station in London. Just before Leigh Station on the left side, you'll see remains of Hadleigh Castle, built in the 12th century. If you get off the train at Leigh Station and walk to Old Leigh, famous for shellfish, pubs, and cobble streets with a small beach. The Thames estuary is tidal, so if the tide is up in sunny days, lots of pubs to relax in. Walk to Southend along the coastal path and seafront. Southend is a traditional seaside resort with the longest pleasure pier in the world, 1.3 miles, and a train runs on it, so you could walk one way and catch the train back. A few ideas. Hope this is helpful, Mark." Thanks, Mark. Always useful to get other ideas from listeners of the show. If you'd like to travel with Amateur Traveler, we're still voting on where to go in 2027. Go to amateurtraveler.com/trips to join the private Facebook group for that voting. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.